It doesn't always begin with a secret. Sometimes it begins with a like, a laugh beneath a post, private reply to a story shared in passing. The betrayal, if it ever comes, won't arrive loudly. It unfolds in the quiet corners of connection, where loneliness meets novelty, where attention becomes a kind of intoxication. In a world where desire is always online, what does it mean when someone slips beyond the emotional lines they once promised never to cross? This story is not about villains or victims, nor is it an apology or a condemnation. It's a mirror, held gently before an ache few talk about, the emotional vulnerabilities, unmet needs, and quiet rebellions behind women who cheat through the blue glow of a screen. This isn't about infidelity. Not only, it's about the human longing to feel real, even when it's digital. It doesn't announce itself. There's no thunder, no fire. It comes like a whisper, a notification in the silence. A photo from a name you haven't spoken in years. A message at 11:12 p.m. when the house is quiet and no one is asking you how you feel. This is where it begins. Not in hatred, not in lust, in attention, and in being seen. She's scrolling, mind half-tangled in tasks unfinished. The day was long. The husband was late. The children loud. Her own name now sounds foreign in her mouth. No one has asked her who she's become in months. And then it pops up. That name. Not a stranger. Not quite a friend. Someone old, yet new again through the prism of distance and time. He comments on her story. Something she almost didn't post. A half-hearted selfie. A quote because she was feeling unseen but didn't know how to say it. He writes, "You've always been poetic like that." Her breath almost stumbles. Because he remembers. And it doesn't feel like a flirtation yet. It feels like being recognized. Like someone still sees what feels forgotten in her daily life. This is the first step. Invisible to most. Harmless at a glance. But what shifts inside is real. There's no intention to betray. Only a flicker of wonder. A spark of memory and meaning. No one teaches us how to name this. This gray space. This emotional place that isn't physical, but no longer purely innocent. She tells herself it's just words. It's just catching up. Everyone reconnects online, she says. And she means it, because this isn't the story of a woman setting fire to her home. It's the story of someone trying to feel warm again. In the quiet architecture of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, there are softened spaces for escape. You can react without commitment, slide into conversations without weight, engage just enough to feel something, yet always return to the safety of your established life. But eventually, messages stretch longer. Responses come faster. The intimacy deepens disguised as empathy. She deserves to be heard, he thinks. She listens to me, he says. And slowly, thread by digital thread, a separate emotional world is spun. One that exists just between the two of them, floating above reality. There are no rendezvous, no hotel rooms, just moments pooled across days, moments she doesn't speak of, but carries inside. There is no betrayal yet, nothing to confess, but something already feels split. A private part of her now lives elsewhere, with someone else. That fracture, small and almost invisible, is the beginning. Because women rarely leap into betrayal. They slip, not from desire, but from deprivation. So even as she pours coffee beside her partner the next morning, smiles at school pickup, meets deadlines, she's quietly returning to her messages. To the one who asks about her dreams. The one who saw her when she didn't know she was worth looking at anymore. And no one suspects, because she hasn't left. But something has already left in her. Before a woman ever replies with a heart emoji. Before her fingers hover over the keyboard at midnight. There's a history, not of betrayal, but of becoming. Some part of her learned, slowly and silently, that to be a good woman meant to be selfless, to give more than she receives, to smile even when the soul goes quiet inside her. This is where the story begins. Not with a man in her messages, but with the subtle education of her girlhood. The rules came dressed in compliments. She's so mature for her age, so helpful, a little caretaker, such a good listener, what they often meant. She learned to shape herself around others' feelings. She soothed instead of being soothed, validated others instead of being held. By the time she was old enough to love, she had already perfected the art of disappearing inside of it, because she was told, directly or through silence, that needing too much was ungrateful, expressing too loudly was unladylike, taking up space without apology was selfish. So she softened, fell in love, built a life, but sometimes that life carried a muted ache. There's a grief to being loved in a way that feels polite, where the routines run smoothly, but the soul feels unslept in, where she's adored for her reliability, but not known for her wildness. And over time, many women learn to turn that ache inward, to name it hormonal, to call it just stress, to quiet what they cannot explain, because the world rarely asks women how they love themselves when no one's looking. It rewards their endurance, not their emotional desires. But desire doesn't extinguish. It just goes quiet, until someone wakes it, and often it doesn't even feel sexual at first. It feels like a soul being mirrored, that emotional attunement she hungered for since her teens, listening without interruption, being asked why, not just how, existence honored not as duty, but as mystery, suddenly appears, in the digital shape of an old flame, a coworker who noticed her shoes, a DM that simply says, "Are you okay? You seem distant today." And the heart remembers, not infidelity, but feeling, the child whose needs went unmet, the teenager praised for responsibility but never comforted in chaos, the girlfriend who packed her pain so neatly it was mistaken for wholeness, the wife who was everything, except fully seen. They all answer, in that one reply, these aren't empty women. They aren't reckless. They are full to the brim with unmet mirrors. And so, when social media opens tiny portals for reflection, they move toward warmth, like anyone would after standing too long in the cold. No wedding band protects against the past. No relationship, no matter how stable, can completely soothe the ancient ache of emotional invisibility. In that ache, many women don't want to cheat. They want to feel, not chosen for their role, but for their essence. Sometimes it's not even about the man in the messages. Sometimes it's about remembering the girl inside the woman, the one who's been waiting to be asked, how her heart survived all this time, without being held. It's not just emotional, it's chemical. That flutter she feels when a message lights up her screen, that's dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that rushes through her when she eats chocolate, hears her child laugh, touches someone who sees her. Her brain can't always tell the difference between real connection and received attention. It only knows that it likes being noticed. Dopamine doesn't wait for marriage vows or emotional history. It responds to novelty, to reward, to the smiley face left under a photo of her in a dress she half believed looked good on her, to the message that says, "I've never stopped thinking about you." Even when she doesn't reply, the mind collects that sensation, locks it in as worth. And slowly, as the conversations continue, as the interaction increases with each scroll, like and reply, there's another process beginning beneath the surface. Attachment formation. Humans are wired for it. From birth to death, we seek emotional anchors. And when those anchors feel weak or distant in our primary relationships, the brain, especially one shaped by abandonment or neglect, looks for new ones. Quietly, often subconsciously, social media offers these new anchors, so effortlessly that it never feels like seeking, simply feels like being witnessed. The woman answering messages isn't calculating betrayal. She's following a soft cue toward affection. Her brain is offering a temporary mental escape. But the reward centers? They're firing as if this is real, because on a psychological level, it begins to feel like real connection. Even if it's built on illusion, that smiling man on the other side of the message, he knows only her most edited parts. He sees her late-night eloquence, her filtered beauty, her curated pain. He mirrors back affection without the friction of real-life tension, without bills, chores, or long silences too thick to fix. So her nervous system relaxes in his presence. Her mind begins to anticipate his notes, and her daily life, perhaps chaotic or unspoken, feels even more distant in contrast. This is called emotional projection. When relationships drift, the mind creates an imagined bond with someone else. Not because they're better, but because they don't yet hold the ordinary. They hold the potential. The fact that this attachment plays out in pixels doesn't make it less powerful. In some ways, it makes it more seductive, because digital connection comes without the ordinary consequences, but all the same emotional chemistry, especially for those whose attachment styles lean anxious or avoidant, those who grew up without consistent emotional safety, who learned to love with one eye open, waiting for withdrawal. For them, a screen can feel safer than a body, typed words more dependable than tone, a curated conversation more comforting than a messy truth. And platforms know this. They're built for it. The algorithms that shape timelines and conversations reward heat. They push forward people we respond to, offer reminders of familiar faces, rekindle forgotten connections. The brain reads this as destiny, serendipity, the universe sending something we needed, but often it's just code. Biology colliding with design, longing wrapped in machine learning. And this is where the digital world begins to slip into the psyche, pulling the heart into scenarios it wouldn't have willingly chosen in the light. Not because she's disloyal, not because she's weak, because the loneliness in her brain has found a pattern that feels like presence. Because something about being responded to at 1:13 a.m. lights up her pain with just enough signal to feel like affection. This isn't addiction in the classic sense. It's attachment amplified. And by the time she starts checking her phone more often, with small, expectant smiles, it's not the man she's addicted to, it's the mirror of being reflected. Right when she didn't know anyone still saw her. She doesn't feel like someone having an affair. She feels like someone caught in two lives. One of them eats dinner at the table as usual, answers, "How was your day?" with fine, smiles, listens, folds towels, sends emails, laughs at the right times. The other sits in her car for a few extra minutes before going inside, rereading the way her name looks in a message from someone else. And this is the complication. She still loves her partner, or parts of him, the memories, the years, the honest try of it all. But love, it turns out, isn't always enough. When emotion and attention drift elsewhere, this is the split. Not physical yet. Emotional, psychological, and it's not as calculated as some might think. It feels more than anything like being pulled in opposite directions by invisible hands. She tells herself it isn't that serious, that they're just talking, that nothing inappropriate has happened. But inside, a quiet war unfolds, a battle between loyalty and longing, integrity and intimacy, the voice that says, "You're not that kind of person," and the other that whispers, "But you were lonely." This push and pull is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the mind's attempt to hold two conflicting truths at once without breaking. And it doesn't always look like guilt. Sometimes it looks like rationalization. He understands me in ways my partner doesn't. We're just friends. I need someone to talk to. At least I'm not lying about this to myself. What she often won't say out loud. I haven't felt alive in months, maybe years. This started when I stopped getting asked how I really feel, because there's shame here, but there's also need, not for sex or secrecy, but for resonance. And yet, the shame grows anyway, not loud, quiet, a soft ache when she sees her partner sleeping peacefully beside her, unaware, when she deletes the message thread before anyone might scroll, when a love song plays and her mind wanders to the wrong person. But it's still easier to pretend than to say what hurts. To name what's gone missing means risking everything that still stands. And so she performs consistency, family, function, fidelity, while a part of her walks daily into an inner world that's now half lit by another man's words. This is emotional compartmentalization, a coping mechanism that breaks the psyche into rooms. So nothing has to be admitted all at once. In one room, she is the wife, the mother, the planner. In another, she's something else. Desired, heard, a mystery again. And the split widens. Not always dramatically, sometimes just by degrees. She listens to songs differently now. Writes captions with a subliminal audience. Checks if he's seen her story before her own husband remarks on her new dress. And maybe he never does, because she hasn't technically lied. She hasn't technically strayed. But she knows. And that knowing begins to carve a silence inside her. Every honest part that once moved toward her partner now hesitates, because secrets reshape how love feels. Even when they're small, even when they're typed. She wonders to herself, am I still a good person? And the answer isn't simple. Not because she has turned cruel, but because she has turned away. Bit by bit, glance by glance, she's become divided. And the worst part, she cannot even name which version of her feels truer anymore. It's just another message. Or so it seems. It arrives on a Tuesday, when the house is quiet and the rain outside feels like background music. Nothing in the words themselves is alarming, but something in her body responds differently this time. Where there used to be anticipation, there is now a pause. Not dread, not guilt, just stillness. Perhaps he writes something bold, something heavier than usual. If we'd met in another life, perhaps it's soft. I miss talking like this. Or maybe someone else sees the message first. A boyfriend, a spouse, a child who accidentally taps the wrong screen. Just enough of it visible to start the unraveling. Whatever form it takes, the moment lands like a stone dropped inside her chest. This is the turning point. The one that doesn't wait for permission, doesn't ask if she's ready. It just comes. Because sooner or later, the fantasy collides with the friction of the real world. Reality rarely lets the hidden stay hidden forever. And even when no one else knows, she begins to feel the weight of her own silence. There is no epiphany yet. Only the quiet crumbling of something she once told herself was harmless. That ache, that hum beneath her ribs. Not because someone found out, but because she did. She finally sees what she's become. How far she's wandered from herself. And the clarity doesn't come as judgment. Comes as grief. Because maybe, for the first time in a long time, she feels the full cost. Not only of what she did, but of what has been missing for so long, that she forgot it was worth protecting. This is when the emotional affair begins to lose its color. The shimmer fades. The secret starts feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a weight. There's a moment, maybe it's mid-laugh reading his message. Maybe it's with her children in the next room, where she realizes this connection was more escape than it ever was love. That despite how seen she felt, he wasn't really seeing her. He was seeing the version she could afford to show through a screen. A version that didn't argue, raise her voice, get tired. A version that didn't stretch into grief or complexity. She was curated. So was he. And for a while, they mistook it for realness. The human mind is brilliant at narrative. It writes love stories where there is simply attention. It stitches meaning into glances, emojis, inside jokes. But now she sees how fragile the story has been all along. Maybe he says something that feels just a little too entitled, or just a little too detached. Maybe he begins to pull away first, and she realizes she was disposable after all. Or maybe he's still waiting, still writing sweet things, still reminding her how special she is. But something in her has changed. She no longer floats when he speaks. She no longer melts at the sound of his name. Because survival mechanisms fall away once we understand what they protected us from. And she sees now, it wasn't even about him. It was about the whole, the ungiven tenderness, the echo in her own soul. The affair only lit it. It never filled it. This is the ache of awakening, subtle devastation, quiet return. Return to her body, her choices, her emptiness and her strength. Not to punish herself, but to pause, to breathe in the costs, to feel the discomfort without hiding. This is when secrets stop seducing, and selfhood begins to wake. There is no big ending, not the kind that people imagine. No overly dramatic confrontation, no lengthy goodbye messages under the full moon. Often it ends quietly, a message unanswered, a story not reacted to, a number deleted only to exist half-remembered in muscle memory. And slowly, almost painfully, she returns, but not to a person, to herself. At first, it feels like withdrawal. There is a hollowness, a strange silence where the messages used to land. She finds her fingers reaching for her phone without reason, like a phantom limb still pulled toward something long gone. And this, perhaps more than anything else, surprises her the most. She wasn't in love, and yet, grief arrives anyway, not the grief for the man, but for what the attention represented. The tenderness, the laughter, the illusion that she could be someone untethered by duty, someone still seen as magnetic, even through a screen. She misses the reflection, more than she misses the person. This is the complicated part of healing. No one prepares you for how mixed it feels. Liberation woven with loss, clarity draped in longing, freedom that carries the echo of shame. Because while the emotional affair may have ended, the questions it opened up remain. Why did it feel like the only place she was allowed to exist freely was in a message thread? Why did her deepest self need to sneak out the back door, instead of sitting down at her own kitchen table? Sometimes she cries for no reason. Sometimes she stares at her partner, maybe the one who never noticed, or maybe the one who now knows, and wonders, can we ever come back from this? That depends. Not on whether or not the relationship is saved, but on whether truth is finally allowed space. Whether silence can be replaced with softness. Whether they can hold the grief between them without running from it. And if not, if this distance is not reparable, then there is a different kind of grief to face. The choice to let go of a relationship that was stable but unsatisfying, or the choice to remain with new honesty about what she needs and what she can no longer quiet. Both roads ask for bravery. Neither comes with guarantees. But for many women, the deepest turning point isn't what they leave behind, it's who they meet within, the version of themselves, no longer willing to ignore their ache, the woman whose needs are no longer inconvenient. She begins to reclaim the language she thought she'd forgotten. I feel, I need, I want, I wish. Small sentences, worlds inside. Healing doesn't mean we erase what happened. It means we stop letting it define our worth. She doesn't become new. She becomes honest. With herself. With what she's capable of. With what pain can push people toward. When they're left unseen for too long. Sometimes she tells the truth for the first time. And even if it shatters things, there's relief in no longer carrying the weight of the unspoken. And sometimes, the truth is quietly held. Processed alone. Private restoration. Only the mirror knows what left her body when she finally ended it. Both are valid. Both carry weight. The point is not how loudly she comes back, but how truly. And that coming back, that subtle re-entry into her own life, comes with grief. Grief for all the years she was faithful on paper, but unseen in spirit. Grief for how easily a few words on a glowing screen felt more like home than the walls she slept beside. Grief for how long she made herself small. For the sake of becoming someone else's cohesion, she lets that grief ripen, not to punish herself, but to feel the gravity of her own heart again. And in doing so, she begins to live in full alignment, not perfect, but whole. Not every story ends with a choice. Some fade quietly into memory, into data wiped clean, into apps deleted and reinstalled, into photos liked but no longer loved, into the spaces between who we became and why. In the end, most people don't talk about it. They don't confess. They don't write it into diaries, or text it to friends, or bring it up over coffee. It becomes a soft ache-turned anecdote, a what-if tucked beneath their breath. "He was never mine," she might say someday, and she'll smile like it didn't matter, while her chest still remembers the shape of that particular longing. Because that's the thing with emotional gravity. The body logs what the mind refuses to unpack. And what makes it harder is that no one wants to talk about female betrayal. There is no elegant narrative for it. No tidy framework of villain and victim. No mitigating mythology. She is often painted as either broken or cruel, rarely as human, rarely as lonely, rarely as reverent toward her own becoming. But behind every screen-told secret, there is always more. A pattern of self-neglect. A culture that praises quiet women for staying. A history of giving ourselves away and calling it stability. So of course it happens half by accident. Of course a message can feel medicinal. Of course she starts to bloom in places her own life forgot to water. Is it betrayal? Perhaps, but not only to someone else. Often first, to herself. To the voice that once said, "This is not enough." To the old promise she made to never forget herself again. And yet, here she is. This isn't to excuse the hurt left behind. There are people touched by these choices. Partners awakened by an unfamiliar version of the person they kissed goodnight. Homes shaken by timing, by omission. But it is to say that the story is never small. That you cannot measure a digital betrayal only in physical proximity. Because it was never just about sex or risk. It was about being interrupted, emotionally, after years of playing it easy, of being okay, of asking for so little it began to show in her eyes. Social media makes it easy, yes, but what it reveals was already there, not a craving for someone else, a hunger for herself, to return to the version of her that once felt electric, without needing others' glow to prove it. Some never get caught, but carry the weight anyway. Others are discovered, and relationships rupture. Some repair, some don't. But healing is never about salvaging a past at all costs. It's about listening to yourself so deeply that infidelity becomes harder, because your own needs are no longer strangers. As the screen fades to black, and the messages go unanswered, somewhere within her, a deeper conversation begins. One that doesn't need a reply, only presence, only patience, only the courage to never disappear from herself again.